Good evening. My name is Paul Charnier. I'm the editorial page editor at the Day newspaper. I welcome you to tonight's debate. It's co-sponsored by the Day and by the Chamber of Commerce of Eastern Connecticut. I'd like to thank the Charter Oak Credit Union for the use of this great facility. I'd also like to thank the League of Women Voters of Southeastern Connecticut, who are providing the timekeepers for tonight's debate. Tonight's debate features the candidates in the 20th State Senate District. That district includes the towns of Bosra, East Lyme, Montville, New London, Old Lyme, Old Saybrook, Salem, and Waterford. The participants in tonight's debate are the incumbent state senator, Paul Formica, and his Democratic challenger, Ryan Henowitz. I'm joined by, on my left, David Collins, a news columnist at the Day newspaper, and on my right, by our managing editor, Tim Cotter. The format for tonight's debate will be going straight to questions. The questions will alternate from one candidate to the other. The candidate who gets the question will have a minute to respond. The other candidate will also have a chance to comment on that question. He'll have 90 seconds. And then it will go back to the person who got the original question for another 30 seconds. At my discretion, I will provide additional time if an issue has been raised that deserves a response. We will have 2-minute closing statements at the end of the event. And with that, I think we're ready to get started. Oh, I'll ask the audience, you've been very good to start. I appreciate it, to not have any applause or interruptions. We want to reserve the time for the candidates and the questions. We'll be going for an hour, and so hold your applause till the end of the event. And we'll get started with the first question, which is to Senator Formica from Tim Cotter.
Senator Formica, you ran last time partly on your background as a businessman who wanted the state to be more business-friendly. What did you do in the last term in Hartford to try to bring that about?
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for having us here this evening. I worked hard in the first session that we had to try to reach out across the aisle and build relationships with both sides so that we had conversations to address a lot of the issues. A lot of the folks up there don't speak to each other. The Republican caucus, both in the Senate and the House, worked on good budgets that we put, I believe, 4 budgets together that addressed what we thought were the issues of the day, that did so without new taxes or tolls. Because one of the first things I think you have to do to address a business environment is to instill confidence in the government. And I think that's the first thing, and then regulatory relief. Thank you.
Your chance, and you have 90 seconds.
Well, so I think that with the business climate here in Connecticut, one of the biggest things that we need to focus on is the fact that we don't have the actual economy working for working people. The more people that we have working and making good wages, solid wages, middle-class wages, we'll actually have a rebounding in the economy here. I think that what we need to look at is how we can help people try and achieve more. I think one of the ways that we can actually do this is through passing a minimum wage for $15 an hour. I think that we need to look at this. I think that part of the business climate is the fact that I know from being on over 1,000 doors here in the district that a lot of people are not making enough money to get by. And we need to address that.
Mr. Formica, you have up to 30 seconds. And it sounded like you maybe had difficulty achieving some business-friendly approach. So if you could kind of elaborate, if there were instances we were able to take that approach to Hartford. You have up to 30 seconds.
Well, I don't know that we had difficulty. We're in the minority up there, and the policies of the longtime majority up there have made the state less than business friendly. Those policies need to be reversed or eliminated in order to do it. So we worked hard to try to put forth some good ideas, to get in the room, to have conversation, and I think the best thing that we can do is speak to each other up there in order to achieve this kind of success.
All right.
Senator, could you tell us your stance on minimum wage, just to contrast?
Well, I kind of differ from a few folks in minimum wage. I think the jury on minimum wage is somewhat out when you look to some of the major cities on the West Coast where they've actually increased minimum wage to $15 and seen job reductions. So I'm not sure that that's the answer. I'm not sure that an increase in minimum wage at this point in time to the levels that have been suggested makes a lot of sense in the business climate we're in. I am in favor of a two-tier minimum wage where you have a head of household minimum wage where people benefit when they leave their household, and then a second tier for students and other folks that may not have that head of household responsibility.
And we'll provide another minute on this one to give Mr. Henowitz a chance at that, his position on perhaps increasing the minimum wage.
So I think the first issue to address is the loss of jobs from the increase of the minimum wage. So right now, if you have a person working 3 jobs at $10 an hour trying to make ends meet, if they end up going to one job at $15 an hour, that's a loss of 2 jobs net for the person, but they're actually making better hourly wages for themselves and more time to actually spend with their family, which we are seeing. People that are making the minimum wage right now are not teenagers. They are in their 20s and 30s, and they're elderly retirees that are trying to supplement their income. I think that the net gain that we see from this is evident. We know that small businesses, for the most part, actually pay more than the minimum wage. The minimum wage, for the biggest part, actually affects big business, and we need to address that.
All right, thank you. Our next question is going to be for you, Mr. Henowitz, and it's from David Collins.
Mr. Henowitz, you filed an elections complaint this year against your opponent, whose daughter works for a company, an agency hired by his campaign. The law in this is very clear. The conflict only exists if the family member is an owner of the company, and Mr. Formica's daughter is an employee of the company. Can you explain your reasoning for filing this complaint?
So I think the first step in filing this complaint is that we want clarification, where we know with state ethics and then with state elections enforcement as being 2 different branches, that they both have different rules on this scenario. And in filing this complaint, we even saw that my opponent Paul even questioned it himself, where he asked ethics if this was an okay situation to have. So the idea that there's these blurred lines between elections and ethics is clearly out there, and clearly an issue that needs to be addressed by the states, so that way we can get unified codes on the issue.
And could you tell us what's the status of that complaint?
I don't know if it's proper to discuss an ongoing investigation.
Okay. And Mr. Formica, you have up to 90 seconds if you wanted to respond to the question we heard.
Thank you very much. You know, I was a challenger a few years ago and used the same marketing firm. As a sitting senator, I thought that there may be an opportunity for me to have some questions about whether I should use that same marketing firm. So I did early on approach ethics and asked them if it was okay to have a marketing company with whom my daughter was affiliated be able to service my campaign. And they said yes for all the reasons mentioned with the question, that not being an owner or commission-based. And so we went ahead and did that. We also believe that the SEC, you have to follow all of the rules. They're complex. So we've spent a lot of time answering questions to making sure that everything is copacetic. We're moving through that process. And we feel confident that we did the right thing and that we were prudent in asking ethics up front. So, I'm comfortable with that. Currently, my daughter is not working on my campaign, so just to make sure everything's all right, once questions came up, we pulled her off.
Mr. Henowitz, up to 30 seconds if you wanted to comment further.
I just think that this just stresses the issue even more, that the CEP, the state elections campaign system, is a good system, and it benefits everyone involved, and it helps us run an election that isn't influenced by large donations from big businesses. I mean, clearly there's still some things to work out in it, but I also believe that going forward, this shows that we can figure out what's going on.
All right, thank you. The next question is to you, Senator Formica. Under the current budget, the state budget that we're in now, Waterford took a big hit with a $1 million cut, I believe, in state education cost-sharing funds. It's the biggest cut in the region. East Lyme also saw a cut, though not as steep. Was this a case of a freshman center being asleep at the switch that we saw these kind of cuts in our area?
No, I think this was a case of the majority being asleep at the switch and allowing the economy to deteriorate over the last 6 years, even in spite of having two largest tax increases in our history, and then continuing on unable to fund not only education here in the 20th District, but those most vulnerable are suffering at the hands of this budget. So I don't know that I was asleep at the switch. I worked very hard to make sure that we got the funding here in the 20th District, both to the magnet schools and to the public school system around the district. It was just a cut that in our Republican budget we restored, and we had all of those ECS cuts restored, as well as the money to some of the other items that was cut out of the budget.
So just 30 seconds on this, just to clarify. So ultimately, the money was returned. Is that Waterford did not get a cut this year?
No, Waterford did get a cut.
Okay,
Waterford did get a cut. But
all right,
as I said, I worked very hard and was very diligent up there, to try to keep sense with what was going on in this very difficult budget environment that
all right, thank
we
you.
had limited input in.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Henowitz, you have up to 90 seconds to either respond to the situation we saw at funding to this district under the ECS, or your comments on the ECS in general, if you so choose, up to 90 seconds.
So I think clearly we need to fight to try and get that education funding back to the district. But I also think, too, of where we cannot just blame everything that went wrong in this legislative cycle on the Democratic Party and on the governor. It's the fact of we elect senators and representatives to represent our district and to fight for our interests. If an individual is not being able to fight for that interest, then they are not providing the benefit to the district that they claim that they were going to do.
Anything further, Senator? Up to 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. Well, the fact of the matter is we have a one-party rule up there, and there was not room for conversation for our leadership to share and negotiate on these ideas that were moved forward. So that, I think, is the biggest thing we can change in Hartford. Let's get a Republican majority in at least one of the chambers so that we can guarantee seats at the table so conversation like this happens. And when you have, the Friendship School, for example, suffered a large cut just some years after it was built. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
All right, the next question is to Mr. Henowitz, and it's from Tim Cotter.
According to a day analysis of 19 years of accident data, I-95 in East Lyme from exit 71 to the 395 exchange had the highest number of accidents and fatalities east of the Connecticut River. Do you think that the governor's transportation plan will address that, or does something have to be done sooner to address that?
Well, so what I believe is that we should extend Route 11. If you actually extend that, you'd alleviate some of the traffic that we see on 95 and 395. So that could address some of the issue. I do think that the governor's transportation plan could be adjusted to allow that to happen earlier. I know that that was on some of the out years for the transportation plan, but I think that would provide a lot of benefit to the area. I mean, right now, people are driving on roads that were not intended to have that kind of traffic to get to Route 11.
Mr. Formica, on the congestion and the accidents we've seen in that area, and also Route 11 was introduced into the discussion, and you have up to 90 seconds.
Thank you. I was, in business at the time of that horrific multiple fatality that occurred at exit 75 and saw the effects of it in the region at the gateway of 395 and 95. I worked hard with Representative Carney to address the issues from the bridge at exit 70 all the way through to exit 80 or crossroads coming through where it seems to be the most congestion. We need to first reduce the speed limit. We need to do that, and I think as shown in Route 6, they increased the margin for the shoulder, which seemed to alleviate a lot of the problems for traffic. So I think we have reduced the speed limit, increased the shoulder if we can. I think there should be more education on driving while distracted at a younger level to make sure that that is taken out of the equation. And as far as Route 11 goes, I, as the first selectman of East Lyme, was on the Route 11 Commission and pushed for many years for the completion of Route 11. The reality of it is that most likely will never be done in our lifetime, so we can't just wait for that to happen. I think we're better off, and I have worked hard at exit 74 with the introduction of the new gateway development there to redo exit 74, both north and south, which will help with safety. And I think let's just redo the interchange at 395. Let's put Route 11 on hold and improve Route 85 all the way up through, and I think we'll have a better bang for our dollar. Thank you.
Mr. Henowitz, you have up to 30 seconds to further respond to what you've heard.
I mean, clearly these traffic scenarios are something that we need to address. I think part of that comes from the funding of the transportation system within the state, and we need to address that. I think that throwing in the towel on Route 11 isn't necessarily the best answer. I think that if you believe in something, you should keep fighting for it.
Before we move to another topic, I'll ask our timekeepers. Let's give the candidates a minute each. Just to expand on transportation, I think everyone, there's pretty much agreement that Connecticut needs to improve its transportation system. There might be disagreements of how to go about it, but certainly that we are in need of repairing and upgrading our transportation system. On the topic of tolls, that's been cited as one revenue source. So if I could just maybe a minute response from both our candidates, starting Mr. Henowitz and then the senator. Are you in favor of tolls or not to fund transportation in Connecticut? Mr. Henowitz?
So I am in favor of tolls. I think that the argument about accidents being caused by tolls should be reviewed, because if we see tolls all across New England and all across the area, then clearly it's not as much of an impact in these other states and not as disastrous as we view it here. I think that that's a way to help adjust for the transportation funding and then create jobs from that alone. I think that we have to look at these avenues to regain revenue from trucks just traveling through the state, actually causing damage to our highways that end up not paying any kind of portion to try and repair it.
And Senator Formica, your position on tolls?
Thank you very much. Right now, I am against tolls for a number of reasons, although they are in most of the states surrounding us. One of the things that happens when you put tolls on roads is that you cannot toll existing roads that we have here in the state of Connecticut without having effect on the contribution the Federal Highway Administration gives the state for their dollars. So I would be looking for a complete fiscal analysis of what the cost of the infrastructure of tolls would be, what the cost of the labor would be, what the intended revenue or expected revenue would be versus what we would be losing from the Federal Highway Administration, and then balance that to see. The governor has proposed $100 billion in new transportation upgrades. We have proposed $70 billion, which we think will do the right thing, be more achievable, and be in line with, when we have to pay it back, because you got to make the payment every month. So we have to do that, and I guess
all right, thank you. With that, we'll move to another question of the topic, and it's for Senator Formica, and it's from David Collins.
Senator, it's been an unusual year for presidential politics, and there are two unpopular candidates at the head of both your tickets. So I'd like you to indicate if you intend to support your party's nominee for president.
Well, You're absolutely right. It's been an unusual top of the ticket year, and it's been very interesting in the debate. First and foremost, this debate and this election here in the state of Connecticut is about moving our state forward and electing people who can go to Hartford to do the job to move our state forward and work together to do that. There are many things about both candidates that many people on both tickets have reluctance to vote for. I have not have the confidence in Mrs. Clinton and the policies that she would put forth, nor some of the trust issues. And you look at Mr. Trump, and he certainly is a bit unpolished, to say the least. Combined with Brazen, I was a little disturbed about some of the policies he talked about in the debate, but he has tapped into a discontent in this country about doing something different. And so as the Republicans here in the state of Connecticut are advocating change for the better, I would be voting for change and supporting the Republican nominee.
And Mr. Henowitz, your view on who you be supporting and whether you support the head of your ticket?
To answer the question, yes, I will be voting for Hillary Clinton. Originally, I had been a big volunteer for Bernie Sanders. I made a lot of phone calls for him. But I believe that right now we're looking at a two-horse race that's going on, the presidential race. And I think that it's a clear difference between the two candidates. We're looking at one candidate in Donald Trump that has so many questions along with him of just making jokes about nuclear weapons is just ridiculous. From somebody that served in the military, I would be afraid on what somebody is going to do when they are joking about scenarios like that. This is real life. These are real people that are willing to sacrifice themselves for our country. And I don't think that's something to joke about.
Mr. Formica, anything else on this question?
How much more time do we have?
You
Well,
you
we
get
have a
another
minute,
30
right?
seconds if you want.
30 seconds now?
You get 30 seconds if you want.
Listen, I fully appreciate the service that Mr. Henowitz provided to his country. And I'm sure he knows that the president, whether you're President Clinton or President Trump, won't be acting alone. There's a number of four-star generals that will be up there providing opportune advice to move our country forward, as long as the number of cabinet members that will be there. So while, again, I share concerns about Mr. Trump, I share equal concerns about Mrs. Clinton, and I think it's just time to move forward for change.
All right, thank you. Our next question is to Mr. Henowitz. A couple of towns in this district, East Lyme and Waterford, and particularly Waterford, where we're at today, have large and diverse commercial and industrial tax bases. Meanwhile, another town in this district, an urban center, New London, is property tax starved, with little land to develop and a large number of untaxable nonprofit agencies. Is there anything more the legislature should be doing to make things more equitable? Mr. Henowitz.
So I do agree that some of the nonprofits act as corporations. They act as for-profit industries. And some of these nonprofits are, for most part, trying to game the system to then not have to pay anything in property tax. So I do believe that that needs to be addressed. I also believe that if the state was trying to allow the city of New London, for example, allow a land value assessment tax, that could try and help out the city in providing a better tax base.
Mr. Formica, and inequities we see with the property tax system between towns in your own district?
Well, yes, and specifically New London. I have said for my entire term that New London is the key to the renaissance of the southeastern Connecticut and the 20th district. And I think with the onset of the potential for the National Coast Guard Museum, we're already seeing an uptick in property transactions and real estate sales happening on Bank Street, State Street. I think what we have to do is to make sure that we help New London set that table so that the growth can happen in the commercial district, which will help increase the property tax revenue and also bring tourists to the area, which will increase business, which will increase sales and the economic activity in New London.
Mr. Henowitz, you'd have another 30 seconds on this topic if you choose.
Well, I agree with Paul that tourism will definitely help out the area, and definitely adding the Coast Guard Museum will be a benefit to the City of New London, to the region. I think that we have to be realistic as well of where, we do need a larger tax base. It's the fact of almost 50% of the city is non-taxable land, and that makes things very difficult, and that provides a very small margin of error in what goes on within the City of New London. So I think the state being able to help out with that would be a good thing.
Again, while we're on the same topic, if we get our time gives another minute to both our candidates before we move to another topic in question. I didn't hear it here. I thought I might. The mayor of Hartford has, with the problems his city is having, has proposed some kind of regional sharing of the burdens and the cost that an urban center faces, and maybe a minute each, if we could hear from our two candidates, starting with Mr. Henowitz, as to whether you might be open at all to some kind of better sharing of the burden that the cities face by the larger community that surrounds them.
I mean, I think that the moving to regionalization is something that needs to be done within this state, even if it's in small part. I know that one of the things that I had advocated for previously was trying to come up with a uniform school calendar. That issue alone would actually help out with regionalizing bus transportation, with education, which could actually impact our cities a lot in our rural areas as well. It's surprising at how small a thing of a statewide school calendar could actually help out.
Mr. Formica, and the proposal you've heard out of Hartford of some idea of some regional help for the cities.
Well, I think there's been a lot of talk of regionalization, over the last few sessions up at the legislature. I'm not familiar in particular with the Hartford suggestion, but they're certainly very close to having to have some kind of suggestion and solution there in Hartford. Here in New London, we have the opportunity to increase our port with the new Port Authority. We got the Tiger Grant to improve the rail line coming out of there, which should in turn allow goods and services to be moved throughout the region, encourage more freighters to come into the city pier. I think if we increased our Shoreline East capacity up to New London, and again, the Coast Guard Museum, development at Fort Trumbull, the number of apartments that are being considered, the number of commercial developments that are being considered, I think it'd be short-sighted at this point in time to move to a regional sharing for New London, because I think in a few years they're going to be very good with what they do, and there's going to be a lot of diverse activity, diverse property taxes, and a lot of stimulated economy in the city of New London.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll move to our next topic in question, and it's to Senator Formica from Tim Carter.
With the Costco development, Senator Formica, do you think that there's enough safeguards in place to protect the town's aquifer? And do you think state law should require that the entire aquifer be protected and not just the wellhead? And should East Lyme take any further action to protect that entire aquifer?
Well, East Lyme has taken quite a bit of action to protect that aquifer there. That is the, unfortunately, it's the largest available commercial piece of property in southeastern Connecticut of its kind. The aquifer runs through there. We have an aquifer commission through the zoning commission. The reason that Costco was allowed there is because the old maps of 30 years ago were inaccurate. And when they came with level 2 mapping, they were able to clearly identify where the aquifer existed and to locate the commercial development there with appropriate safeguards. I have a long history as the first selectman of managing water resources in the town of East Lyme and regionally. So we take that very, very seriously and have worked very hard to not only protect our aquifers, but to have the expansion into the New London system for a historic water sharing opportunity that happens between East Lyme and New London, so that we can spread our water wealth throughout the community.
So you are comfortable that there are enough safeguards with that development?
That development has been fully vetted, and I think that we are very comfortable with the water protections that are in place, particularly in that aquifer. I think we probably have more opportunity for runoff and wastewater. I think we need to do a better job, similar to what we did at the hole in the wall, where we captured 23 acres of wastewater and siphoned it into detention ponds and kept it from going into Long Island Sound. I think there needs to be more of that throughout the region, and it would be better protection of our water supply. But yes, that was my long answer to your question.
So you have 90 seconds to comment on the issue of the aquifer protection in East Lyme and the Costco development, how that might affect that.
Well, so I believe that taking the public interest into account is one of the most important things that we can do with new developments. I think watching out for a public health hazard like contamination of water is extremely important. We know on the public level, all that we have to do is look at Flint, Michigan, and know what kind of impact the loss of public water can have on a community. So I definitely think that going forward, we need to look into what can happen if public water gets affected.
Just to give you a chance to elaborate, so you're okay with locating the Costco gas station over the aquifer? It sounds like Senator Formica is, just to clarify your position.
So to clarify my position, I think that, one, this is more of a local issue of where I think we consult the local government to ensure that they're okay with it. I don't think it's as much of a state issue as it is a town issue. But I think that if all the standards have been met, and if we are sure that this is going to be protected, then that would be fine.
And you'd have another 30 seconds if you want to elaborate further, Senator.
So just to clarify, I don't believe the Costco is over the aquifer. It's in the Upland Review area, which is off the aquifer. And I think the water is definitely a state issue. We need to work hard as a water planner to move things around. And when I was chairman of COG on the Regional Water Committee, we worked to institute a 23-town water transportation program that connects water lines to all of those towns, so that if something happens to water, we have redundancy similar to what happens with electricity. So the COG is a leader on that. The Water Committee is working with the utilities, and it's moving forward. So,
all right, thank you.
thank you.
And our next question from Mr. Henowitz is from David Collins.
Mr. Henowitz, your employment record, other than your military service, has been primarily with the union that represents many government workers in the state. Do you think that your loyalty to your former employer would compromise your ability to look at the budget and pension issues as they affect state workers?
I don't think that it would at all. I've spent my life fighting for the things that I believe in, whether it's for my country or the unions, as you put it, the teachers and nurse union that I worked for, because I fought for the middle class. I fought for the people. And most recently, I actually worked for the Working Families Organization, trying to get through paid family medical leave. So I think that with my work history, it's all been about trying to fight for the things that I believe in. And I'm here today because I want to fight for the 20th District and fight for the people here.
Senator Formica can respond to that, but also your position, on should the opening of the contracts be under consideration to try to get the savings that may be necessary to get the fiscal house back in order, and you have up to 90 seconds.
Thank you. Well, we have called on our side of the aisle to have a vetting of all union contracts through the legislature. You saw what happened when the Yukon contract came forward, and there was a lot of discussion with regard to that. Certainly there are a number of union positions held in the legislature, paid union employees. Whether that represents a conflict of interest and whether they should recuse themselves, I don't know. I know this. We have to put Connecticut back to work. And we're not going to put Connecticut back to work as long as our fiscal policies remain the same. We need to work hard to manage our spending, manage our budget, pension reform. We need to, your question was open the contracts. That's the governor's job, not the legislature's job, but I certainly would encourage him to do that because right now the spending cap that we're operating under is non-existent, and they're taking a lot of those dollars and exempting them from the spending cap, which is actually going to pension debt. So there's a lot of things that we need to do to reform. It's not going to happen overnight. It took 30 years of one-party rule to get us to this point. It's going to take us some time to get us out. But the question is, can we have people in Hartford that are willing to work together, reach across the aisle, and have conversation in order to get some of these things done?
And I'd like to give Mr. Henowitz a minute because I'm going to kind of elaborate on the issue. Kind of two issues were raised. One, do you think that the legislature should be approving the labor contracts? Right now, they have the option of doing so. They very seldom do so. So should they always go to the legislature for action? Since and secondly, do you think the union should be willing to reopen the contracts, the benefits contracts, given the serious fiscal problems the state faces, to try to find some labor savings short of more layoffs? And I'll give a minute for Mr. Henowitz on the labor issue.
So now I believe that there's a couple different issues raised in there. So the first one was you raised the point, Paul, of should the unions be a part of reopening it, while my opponent, Paul, brought up the point of that the governor should open it. So I think that if we are saying that the governor should use that executive force and just have one party decide to break a contract, then I completely disagree with that. I think a contract is entered into by both parties, by both individuals. If they want to go back and look at it, that's one thing. The other part of the issue that was brought up was that it hasn't been 30 years of one-party rule, as we've had numerous Republican governors throughout this time period, one of which signed a 15-year state employee contract and helped create a lot of the mess that's going on. I also believe that what was done recently with laying off 1,000 of the lowest paid state employees was also the wrong way to go about this.
And I hope the senator will mind me just try to get an answer on the issue of whether the legislature should act on labor contracts, make that a requirement as opposed to now where it's optional.
I think that having the legislature vote on the labor contracts is unnecessary. I think that right now you already have the executive branch and the union sitting down to figure out the contract. So you already have the input going in on the issue. Once it's already agreed upon, I don't believe that's necessary for the legislature to actually approve of the contract that has already been approved by the executive branch.
All right, thank you. And I'll give you another 30 seconds to be fair, Mr. Formica, if you want to comment further on this issue.
Sure, thank you. I agree with Mr. Henowitz that a contract is a contract and need to be honored. As first selectman, I negotiated many union contracts, and without strong employees, work doesn't get done. But the fact of the matter is, in the state government, it is the governor's position to negotiate contracts, and I believe 14 or so he's in the process of negotiating now that expired on June 30th. So we need to do pension change, and just an example on voting on contracts. The Yukon contract in question at the committee level was voted 6-6 by the Senate, 24-18 by the House, and if it did not go to the legislature, it would have passed, even though a 6-6 vote would have indicated failure. So,
All right, I'll have to wrap it up there.
Thank
Thank
you.
our candidates. Next questions is to Senator Formica. In your role as a state senator, what have you done to address the heroin opioid crisis confronting our region and our state? And what more, if anything, do you think the state needs to do?
well, in my role as first selectman in East Lyme, we held a few forums on this issue as my administrative role as administrative chief of police. So we began raising awareness by holding forums, and I continued to do that when in my first term as state senate. This is about an education issue. This is a scourge that's traveling through our entire country. We need to do many things. We passed some legislation that allows a more liberal use of Narcan and prescription drug restrictions. I think we should go further. I think we should have warning labels on all of those narcotic drugs that say that yes, they could in fact be dangerous and addictive. That doesn't exist now. But I think in the future we have to work to expand access to 12-step recovery programs, more beds for addicts, because when they raise their hand and they want help, we got to have some place to be able to put them. So that will be a program that I will push if I'm lucky enough to be elected next time.
And you have 90 seconds. What ideas might you bring to Hartford if elected to address the heroin opioid crisis?
Well, I definitely agree with Paul on this issue. I don't think this is a party line issue. I think that this is a societal issue where we have to address this problem. I do like the new program that was coming out trying to address recovering addicts through a holistic approach, trying to get families involved in it, trying to help out the individual in recovery. So I definitely think that we need to address that, and I think that the more funding that we can get for this issue, the better. I definitely agree with Paul on the Narcan issue. I think that every first responder should be trained in how to use Narcan, should have it on them, because this is what this is about saving lives and saving people.
And you have another 30 seconds, and your opponent raised the issue of cost. The state doesn't have a lot of money, but these things cost money, so if maybe in your summarizing, if you could address that issue as well.
I guess
30 seconds.
The governor, thank you. The governor introduced a new social finance program that floated bonds to help with these things upon effectiveness. Here in communities across the state, the DARE program or similar programs are introduced as drug and alcohol awareness in the 5th grade, and then nothing else happens. I think that there should be an expansion of that DARE program to introduce them to the police as their friends in the 5th grade, an introduction to what the drugs look like, then 7th grade when they begin to see those in their hands, and then 9th grade when they become actively using. So I think that there's an expansion that needs to be done, and that could be effective in handling the drug problem.
Well, thank you. And our next question is from Mr. Henowitz, and it's from Tim Cotter.
A mention was made of putting Connecticut back to work. We have a lot of young people leaving the state in pursuit of good-paying jobs elsewhere. What would you specifically want to see done to keep them here?
Well, so specifically, so I think that a lot of the young people are not just moving because of jobs. They're also leaving because of educational opportunities. One of the things that when I read about it, I loved was Tennessee has what's called the Tennessee Hope Scholarship, where what the state does is any graduate from a Tennessee high school with a 3.0 GPA will get their community college tuition paid for by the state as long as they continue to achieve that 3.0 GPA. And I think that that's one of the good things that we should try and institute here in Connecticut. I think that saying that if kids achieve, that they can go on to school and that we can help them out. So I think that by being able to keep the kids here in the state through community college, we actually are increasing our chances that they will settle down in this state as they grow older.
And Mr. Formica, on the topic of trying to keeping young people here in Connecticut and opportunities here, and you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's critical as we move into the next generation of Connecticut here. And it's not happening. It's not happening for a number of reasons. Our transportation is not adequate, and housing is not adequate, and the jobs are not prevalent due to the fiscal environment of our state. So we need to work hard and continue the community college training program that is working very well across the state now, where Three Rivers has a sheet metal shop and Grasso Tech has a welding shop. Young people are being trained to move into manufacturing positions. EWIB has worked very hard with the federal grant Congressman Courtney was able to get to move people. I understand there's in excess of 150 people that are already moving through that system of training and get into jobs. But You're not going to have young people working, middle-aged people working, or old people working unless we have an environment in our state that's conducive to business confidence, with regulatory easing and a tax system that people are willing to move here and willing to stay here and willing to grow their company here. We have to set the table as a state, not play on it, and let business do the innovation and the hiring. So we definitely need young people here. I have 4 children, 2 of which are living out of state, and I think if I had not had my own small business, the other 2 probably would be gone too. So we have to make it more attractive for young people and older Connecticut people to stay here in the state. Thank
And
you.
Mr. Henowitz, you get last word on this topic. You have up to 30 seconds.
So I think that a lot of things get to this. It's not just a business climate. It's a lot of the practices that we're just doing throughout the state. As I had said earlier, we look at the state budget and what happened with it. We ended up laying off 1,000 of the lowest paid state employees, the new state employees. So these are the individuals that are the young people within the state that are trying to get their profession going. They're working in what is actually a real profession, a middle-class profession, and what do? We cut the legs out from under them as soon as they got there.
All right, thank you. The next question is from David Collins, and it's to Senator Formica.
Senator, you were critical of Governor Malloy's establishment of a park at Seaside, and I wonder if you now support the administration's plans to solicit an investor to put money and rehabilitate those buildings and to operate a lodge there that might create a new revenue.
Well, thank you. I think it goes to the completion of my last answer. That was, in my view, a play that shouldn't have happened. That Seaside had been in disrepair for a decade or more before I decided to run for the state senate. It was during my campaign that the governor decided to make that a park. And yes, I was critical because the town of Waterford would have received property tax dollars as a result of the plan that was on the table. The mental health and those most vulnerable were due to receive dollars as a result of that plan, $8 million, I believe. And that was all scuttled for a park that 18 months later and tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in study by the state determined that, yes, we need to do almost the exact same plan that was on the table before. I don't think the state needs to be in that business. I think we turn it over to developers, allow them to do it. The developer had an opportunity for a park along the waterfront as well as the commercial operation that you indicated.
All right, Mr. Henowitz, you have 90 seconds to address your views on Seaside and the current plan for that facility.
So I agree with Seaside of where, with Paul on Seaside of where allowing development to go on within the business while still keeping a park there, while still keeping the scenery available to everyone involved is definitely beneficial. And it's the fact that we need to get a lot of this non-taxable pilot funding off of the state dollars and actually receiving tax dollars for a lot of this land. We know that pilot funding is not adequate enough, and I think that having that kind of tax roll access, I guess, would have been beneficial, especially with that $1 million loss in education funding.
You have another 30 seconds, Mr. Formica. Would you go so far as to try to put some legislative roadblock into the way of the current plan, or are you just going to let the executive branch play it out?
Well, I think they know my opinion on the matter, so I don't know we'll let them play it out like that. Listen, DEP's budget was cut $2 million for park operations. Most of that came in jobs that were lost and services that were provided. If we can't fund the necessary personnel for the parks that we have, why are we opening up a new park for something like that? Why are we spending capital dollars? Why are we bonding? Why are we spending dollars on consultants when we all know that the answer is not having the state involved in doing business? Let the business community take care of that.
All right, thank you. And next question is to Mr. Henowitz. Connecticut has recovered about 80% of the jobs lost in the Great Recession. By contrast, job recovery in both New York and Massachusetts has tripled that amount. What specific actions would you propose, if elected, to help increase private sector job growth in Connecticut?
Well, so I believe that we should take some of the practices that have been used in Massachusetts to actually benefit Connecticut. I know that one of the things that I've heard a lot about was with construction, of where in Massachusetts the thresholds are much lower for what's called PLA programs, project labor agreements. It's basically construction programs that pay decent wages and decent benefits. And it's the fact of, if Massachusetts is following this plan and they're helping out their area, helping out their own construction, helping out their own field, maybe we should try and take some of their practices and do them in Connecticut as well.
Mr. Formica, on the Connecticut trailing far behind our neighbors on job creation since the recession.
Well, listen, Connecticut is last in all of the things that we need to be first in, and first in all of the things we need to be last in. So we have to, we have to reinvent where we're going as a government. We have to reinvent and create more confidence in the business community so that they will bring jobs here. I talked about the community college training program. The Magnet School in New London is working on job skills, moving through that to get to the job force. We need to work on property tax, which is, I believe, the second highest in the nation, and we have to work on regulatory and energy costs. And I think the biggest thing that we need to do in the next session is to make sure that we secure baseload energy power for Connecticut and the region so that we can continue to provide the energy that's necessary to operate these plants that we're talking about manufacturing large numbers of helicopters, submarines, and whatever else that we have, jet engines and whatever else we have. So I think without all of those things coming together, we're not going to see or catch up to the rest of the nation in job growth.
And Mr. Henowitz, in your final comments on this question, if you could address Mr. Formica's opinion, we're going in the wrong direction in Connecticut. The Democrats have been in charge. Why should voters consider it a Democrat if they've had their chance? As you talk about the issues of the state of our economy. And we'll give a minute to Mr. Henowitz on that one.
Well, I think that voters should go for me because I'm not the average Democrat that we've seen up there in the state legislature. I think that we haven't gone far enough in fighting for the middle class, fighting for the working families. I disagree on a Republican-held House or Senate because I think that, yes, that represents change within the state, but not the kind of change that we need. I don't think that we need change to benefit big corporations and big business. I think that we need a change that benefits actual regular people and working people.
All right, next question. Getting towards the end of our hour. It's to Senator Formica from Tim Cotter.
Funding for the regional tourism districts were cut. And Senator Formica, you're the co-chair of the Tourism Caucus. Do you support reinstating those funds, and what did the caucus do, or what can the caucus do in that regard?
Well, thank you. I've spent most of my adult life in the hospitality industry, and I know the good jobs that are created through tourism industry here in southeastern Connecticut and throughout our state. Tourism plays a large part in all four corners of Connecticut. That's why the implementation of the Tourism Caucus with my co-chair, Diana Urban, and we sent out an email that attracted 41 responses from legislators across both sides of the party across our state. The three districts that have been whittled down to which the question refers had been funded for many years in the same way, and they put out fulfillment of brochures and things like that. We have to look at, again, innovation and new ways to do business. By bringing people from both sides of the aisle together, we can have conversations on this issue, how we can work together with the North and the South, the East and the West, and the Center museums, so that we perhaps don't need to fund the districts in the way that they were funded. But the districts are creatures of the legislature, so they're not just going to go away, so we need to have an answer to this question.
And Mr. Henowitz, on the issue of the eliminating the funding for the tourism districts and and on how we promote tourism given our fiscal constraints. And you have 90 seconds to respond.
So I think promoting tourism with our fiscal constraints, I think that the entire goal of tourism is to get outside dollars flowing into the state. I think that what we have to look at is the fact that a lot of the funding that we gave for the tourism commercials that Connecticut gave was actually to a New York company to try and produce this. It's the fact of, if we want to promote tourism within Connecticut, I think that we should be hiring the companies in Connecticut to promote tourism, to try and produce those videos, to try and produce those brochures. I think that the tourism dollars that we spend, our goal needs to be outside money coming in, not us giving it to outside states.
And last word, 30 seconds on this issue.
So everybody carries around one of these. We used to have to carry around quarters to go around and get a payphone. Times are changing. I support the boots on the ground knowledge and information and connection that the tourism districts have, and we have to find a way to harness that. But we also have to find a way to deal with the economic realities we have, and that is about getting people together to have conversations so that we can do the best for our state and promote our state. Cutting advertising when the dollar is, when business is down is not the way to do it. That's when you increase advertising.
All right, thank you. And we have time for one more question. David Collins has a chance to ask that, and it goes to Mr. Henowitz.
Mr. Henowitz, the budget problems this last session that led to the layoffs that you decried tonight seem like probably just a warm-up to the enormous fiscal crisis that is going to come upon the General Assembly when either one of you takes a seat at the next session. And so I wondered if you could address, if not layoffs, what other means the state might use to address that crisis? Cuts in services, more taxes? How would you recommend balancing the budget if not laying off more workers?
Well, I think the first step in balancing the budget is, one, shared sacrifice. I believe that what should have been done this last budget cycle should have been passing what was called the low-wage employer bill, which went after corporate welfare. It said that the large employers like Walmart, McDonald's, Burger King, that don't provide actual professions for regular people should pay a fee back to the state, because what they're taking right now is corporate welfare in the way of subsidizing the wages of their employees through state assistance, state housing assistance, state food assistance. And it's the fact of, we should not be subsidizing corporations that make billions of dollars and are not providing real professions to our community.
Senator Formica?
Would you repeat the question?
David?
Yeah, the financial crisis that's ahead of us all is going to involve some serious discussions about either layoffs or cuts to services or new taxes. So what would be your solution to try to balance the budget in the coming session?
And he has 90 seconds, timekeepers.
Well, we have what we're calling a $19 billion budget with a $1 billion deficit in rough numbers. I think the first thing we have to do is to look at an $18 billion budget and build from there. Then whatever is left afterward, that's what we sit down and negotiate to get solved. I think we have to utilize more online resources. There are new programs that are working with veterans' mental health that have been successful and are being tried in pilot programs with the VA and United Healthcare, with allowing access to mental health improvement for veterans that cost 90% less of providing services like that. I think we need to eliminate the mailed, the franking position that we have. We mail all kinds of literature out. We can go online. We can reduce a lot of that. And I think if we're really going to have true budget success, we need to be in partnerships with those people that we do business with. Partnerships with cities and towns, partnerships with hospitals, partnerships with businesses, so that we can work together. And if we institute a spending cap, have a real bonding cap, then we can consolidate agencies, work together, maybe through attrition and retirement. I agree with Mr. Henowitz in that layoffs were not the answer. The Republicans offered furloughs, and that was rejected. So We need a good, strong, vibrant workforce, but we need a good, strong, vibrant business community and sound fiscal policies in our state level in order to provide that.
Mr. Henowitz, last word on our last question, 30 seconds on the budget situation.
Well, so I think that shared sacrifice needs to be realized throughout the state. You know, the state employees don't just consist of the unionized state employees. There are also ununionized state employees. What we saw recently was UConn giving out raises to 4 individuals in excess of $50,000 and bonuses in $25,000 excess. So we're seeing it of where individuals at the top level within the state government are still not seeing the cuts that we're requiring from the state employees on that lower level.
All right, with that, we're going to move to our final statements, candidates have 2 minutes each, up to 2 minutes each, and we begin with Mr. Formica.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Henowitz. And thank you to the Day, the Eastern Connecticut Chamber of Commerce, the good folks here at the Charter Oak Credit Union, and the League of Women Voters for hosting this discussion this evening. Mostly, though, I want to thank the people of the greatest district in our state for the opportunity to serve as your state senator these past 2 years in Hartford. It has been one of the great honors of my life. I've used my experience as an elected official and small-town CEO, a regional community leader in my 33 years of experience overseeing our family business to put forth new ideas and common-sense practical solutions to the problems at hand. I've tried to be present and available anytime to everyone in each of the 8 towns in the 20th district, to listen carefully so that I would be able to be your strong voice in Hartford. In Hartford, I've tried to collaborate with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, in both the Senate and the House, as we discuss and debate the very important business of the state of Connecticut. In closing, be assured that we can and will fix this fiscal crisis in Connecticut. We can restore pride and positive energy in our state, and we can grow our economy and balance our budget while supporting those things that we must support: public safety, those most vulnerable, health care, education, families and business, and being strong partners with our cities and towns. But we must first put aside the divisiveness of party politics and focus on a new way forward, a new process that unites all of our hearts and minds in the conversation necessary to foster the communication and collaboration that we will need to move Connecticut forward. Tonight and over the next 5 weeks, I humbly ask once again for your vote, and I pledge to you, as I did 2 years ago, to work as hard as I can on your behalf if I'm reelected as your state senator for the 20th District. And thank you all for coming this evening.
And thank you, Senator. And Mr. Henowitz.
Well, I would also like to thank my opponent, Paul, for this great debate. Thank the Day and Charter Oak Bank for having us here, along with the League of Women Voters for helping us as the timekeepers. Really, I would just like to say that I'm really honored to be here to try and represent the 20th District. It's been the majority of what I've known my whole life, growing up here in Montville and then living in New London after my service in the military. It's been an area where I think that we need somebody really trying to fight for us. We've seen the education cuts, we've seen the loss of jobs, and we know that it's not working for this district. That we need somebody that's going to actively participate in what's going on with our area. And I would like to do that. I think that with my experience of fighting for what I believed in, fighting for my country, fighting for the teachers and nurses, fighting for the middle class, fighting for the working families, trying to get through paid family medical leave, protecting maternity and paternity leave for everyone. This is the kind of area that we need to go and the kind of pathway that we need forward. We need to find somebody that'll fight for regular families. And I think that's what our state needs.
All right, thank the candidates. You're going to applaud now for our candidates? We thank you for being such a respectful audience, and don't forget to vote on November 8th. Thank you very much, and good night.